We are going to continue with the Jarrett chapter 9 with the second section which is entitled America Intervenes. And so we're going to continue with the section and hopefully get this done relatively quickly. It's a very short section. So America Intervenes, section 2. When the war first broke out in Europe, which of course was 1914, President Woodrow Wilson attempted to follow the traditional American policy of neutrality, and we've seen the term neutrality and defined it numerous times. But we're attempting to follow that policy of neutrality, going all the way back to Washington. Anyway, in 1916, as he was running for re-election, keep in mind he was first elected in 1912, when he campaigned for re-election, he ran on the grounds that he had kept America out of the war. And that was one of his campaign slogans: he kept us out of war. Yet, despite his best efforts, Wilson's best efforts, the United States eventually did become involved in the war for several different reasons. We're going to take a look at those reasons right now. The first one would be the ties that we had with the Allies. Closer ties. I think closer is probably the key word in that statement. We had ties with any number of different European nations, but we had closer ties with the Allies, and primarily we're talking about the British and the French here. Many Americans traced our ancestry back to the British, and of course it was the British who originally founded the original 13 colonies. We had with them a common language and history that connected us to the British. Now again, we're not talking necessarily about the American Revolution or the War of 1812, that is part of history as well. But we're talking about our history going all the way back to the Pilgrims, to Plymouth Rock, all the way through everything that happened in the 13 colonies, the founding of the 13 colonies, the French and Indian War, on and on and on. We have centuries of history with the British, and so because of that, because of those close ties with the Allies, we were more likely to come down in a war. We were more than likely to side with them over the other guys. So, the United States, Great Britain, and France all shared many of the same principles when it came to our political system. Now, our system wasn't exactly the same as theirs. It's a little bit different in a number of ways, but there are some similarities. And because of those similarities, again, we're talking about close ties, those close ties with the Allies, because those close ties that we shared, the United States, shared with with the British and the French, we were able to, because of those ties, we decided to join the war on their side. Of course, on the other side of the other hand, there were any number of Americans who had German ancestry, myself included. My ancestry is both English and German. So, on one hand, we had many Americans who were of German ancestry, probably millions of them. But because of our close ties to the Allies, we decided when we did enter the war to enter the war on the side of the Allies. Let's go to the next slide. A couple more of the reasons why we joined the war on the side of the Allies. Because of German actions, the German actions and propaganda. Now, we will see, if we haven't seen it already, some examples of that propaganda in another PowerPoint. The Germans were really the aggressors of this war. It was the Austrians that started the war by invading or threatening to invade Serbia because of the death of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but they were doing so at the urging of the Germans. It was the Germans who were more of the aggressors on the high seas. It was the Germans who used unrestricted submarine warfare. There I go, I got it. And of course, they're also the ones using things like chemical agents, chemical weapons against us, the mustard gas. So they were the aggressors. So their actions in the war that we were watching, that we were reading about, we didn't like that. And then, of course, you throw in the propaganda, some of the posters and some of the short little films that were coming out, some of the things that were coming out at the time. Those things led us to join the Allies. We were especially shocked at the German invasion of neutral Belgium. Again, we were neutral. We respected other people's neutrality. So the German war plans called for the invasion of this neutral country to speed up their conquest of France. Okay, so they wanted to go through Belgium, which is a small little country. By now we see it on the map. If we haven't, we will see it on the map soon. They went through Belgium to get to France to sort of bypass some of the defenses that the French already had in place. In order to outflank those defenses, they went through Belgium, which was a neutral country. It had been neutral forever, and it still is neutral to this day. We, American newspapers, yellow journalists, ran stories and pictures depicting the Germans and their atrocities against the civilians. There's one in particular I'll show you, again, if I have not already shown it to you, of a German soldier. You can tell it's a German soldier by his uniform and his helmet, dragging what looks to be a young girl, 10, 11, 12 years of age, away. In the background, you can see the fires, the burning of the cities of Belgium. Now, he's not dragging her away to get her ice cream. Those types of things, those types of propaganda, keep in mind we're talking about propaganda, those type of propaganda posters, those type of propaganda news stories run by the yellow journalist newspapers convinced us, the United States, to join against the Germans and join the Allies. Another one would be the Zimmermann telegram. We talked about this in great detail when we went over the vocabulary terms. Secret message from the German foreign minister, Zimmermann, to Mexico, promising a return of the U.S. territories to Mexico. Territories like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, lands that Mexico felt that we had stolen from them. Anyway, Zimmermann promised the Mexicans that if they aided us, if they would help Germany fight the United States, and once the war was over and the Germans won, then those territories would be returned. Okay, those territories would be returned to Mexico, again, if Mexico would help the United States. As you can well imagine, let me clean this up right here a little bit. As you can well imagine, the American public was enraged. We were outraged. We were pretty upset when the telegram was discovered in print in newspapers. Now, fortunately, the Mexicans did not take up the Germans on this offer, or lots of problems, particularly for Mexico, could have resulted. The strategy is good. We are attacked by Mexico on our southern border. We are distracted by this, which then makes it more difficult for us to send troops to Europe to help our allies against Germany. Germany wins the war over there, and then they attack with the help of their Mexican allies here. They attack us, defeating us, and then Mexico regains all the territory that the Mexicans, believe were stolen from them. It's a good strategy. It, of course, did not work because of the fact that the telegram was made public. The freedom of the seas. This is another one of those reasons. The freedom of the seas is something that we here in the United States have taken quite seriously for centuries. The War of 1812, the War of 1812, sort of the Second American Revolution, many people believe it to be, was fought primarily because of the British capturing of U.S. ships and the kidnapping of American sailors and forcing them to serve in the British Navy. That war was fought primarily because of that reason. There are others, but that's the biggest reason. So we have felt for years that anyone who attempted to stop the flow of the freedom of the seas, to stop shipping, was doing it unfairly, was doing it against what should be international law. Okay, so the main reason for our entry into World War I, and I think this is very important to understand, that the main reason for our entry into World War I was unrestricted submarine warfare. Well, in fact, let's take it back a step. Let's just start with submarine warfare. Okay? Clean that up a little bit so it's a little easier to see. Submarine warfare. Let's go with that first, and then we'll get to unrestricted submarine warfare. First little bullet right here. The British blockade. The British naval blockade. The British blockaded the German ports. Germany had several ports on their northern shore. Germany is mostly landlocked, but it does have access to the Atlantic Ocean through some northern ports. Anyway, the British naval blockade prevented food and arms were being shipped to Germany, at least through the seas. Now, of course, keep in mind that the Germans were pretty much surrounded by their enemies at this time. You had the French and the English as well, but the French and English to their east, and the Russians and some of their allies to the west. So Germany was able to get a lot of food and arms from some of their allies, some of their training partners through these ports, but the British Navy blocked them, so that way they were not getting them in. The idea was, of course, to starve out the British people, to starve out the German military, so they did not have the food or the weapons that they would need to continue the war. Meanwhile, while the Brits were blocking the German ports from receiving or sending goods out, the United States became the main source of Allied arms, supplies, and food. We, the United States, were supplying tons of food, weapons, ammunition, and all the other supplies that we could to our allies. The German Navy was too weak. The British Navy is still one of the best, one of the biggest, if not the best, Navy in the world at this time. And the German Navy was too weak to break through the British blockade by using submarines, a relatively new technology. Though the first submarines have been used in the American Civil War, no one had really spent a lot of time or money developing them as a true weapon the way the Germans had. The Germans were able to retaliate against the British Navy by sinking merchant ships that were delivering goods to Great Britain. Of course, they could also sink warships, but since they were not getting food and ammunition and the other supplies necessary for war, they started attacking the merchant ships from America and other places, but from America primarily, that were delivering the goods to Great Britain that they needed to continue the war. And unlike battleships, when an American warship sinks a German ship, or a British warship sinks a German ship, there's room to take on survivors. They would stick around to pick up survivors. Unlike that situation, submarines had no room for survivors. So if you were on a ship that was sunk by a German U-boat, you would not be rescued by the submarine. You were either in the water to an allied ship came by, or you didn't get rescued. So the British blockade creates all kinds of problems for the Germans. They start using their U-boats to retaliate. Sinking of Lusitania. We talked about this previously. We talked about the vocabulary terms. It was a British passenger liner. Okay. In 1915, Lusitania left New York City for Liverpool, most famous for, of course, the band The Beatles, but it has done other things. Anyway, the Liverpool city in England was the site where Lusitania was traveling to as it left New York City, and much of the cargo below deck was made up of munitions, guns, ammunition, the things that the British needed for their war effort. Okay, so even though it was a passenger ship, and there were 1,200 plus passengers on it, including the crew, you probably got 1,500 people, more or less, on this ship. There was a great deal of munitions, weapons, bound from New York to Liverpool for the British war effort. A German submarine sank the passenger ship, killing more than 1,000 passengers. The number's probably closer to 1,200, And most importantly, though, to us, not most importantly to the world, but most importantly to us, there are 128 Americans on board that ship who died. Now, there are others who survived, but 128 Americans died with the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, this again is a huge thing. It's not what pushed us into the war. That's 1915. We don't get involved in the war until 1917. Takes us to our next event that leads us to getting into the war, the Sussex Pledge. The Sussex was a French ship that was providing ferry service on the English Channel. The English Channel is a body of water between the continental European continent and the country of Great Britain, the country of England. A German submarine attacked the ship in 1916, killing more than 50 passengers. Now, again, that pales in comparison to the numbers lost in the Lusitania, but it is a continued threat that the Germans are providing to what essentially is a civilian ship. So President Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States at this time, threatened to break off relations with Germany and essentially go to war with Germany. Now, not necessarily go to war would be the end goal, the end game of this, but it was implied. By breaking off relations, that means that we're definitely going to side with the Allies if we do get into the war. And most people felt at this time in 1916 we would be entering the war on the side of the Allies. If we were to enter on the side of the Germans, then breaking off relations with them, breaking off those relations could be a very bad sign. So Germany, as a result of this threat, pledged not to sink any more passenger liners without prior warning. I think this is the important part. Prior warning or providing help to passengers. So if I'm the captain of a U-boat and I'm on patrol and I see a British passenger liner, thanks to the Sussex Pledge, I would surface, warn the ship that it's about to be attacked, so we can make the proper precautions are taken to provide a radio message that they're about to be attacked, so nearby ships can come by and provide assistance, or begin to offload on their all right, I'm back. I'm sorry. Someone came to the room and I have to stop and get back to where I was at. So the Germans pledged, thanks to the Sussex Pledge, to provide warning before they attacked the passenger liner, say it's a British passenger liner, or provide help to passengers. So there's only so many of these boats, the small little boats that these passenger liners carried, that could carry the people in case of a sinking. And so without warning the possibility of getting the people on board, the civilians on board to those safety boats, those lifeboats, was almost non-existent. So the prior warning allowed the ship to begin to evacuate civilians in these safety boats, these lifeboats, so that way they would not be killed after attack. And then, of course, after the attack, the Germans were supposed to provide help. Well, because of the blockade, the British blockade, because of the fact that the war was going badly, because of the fact that we were leaning very heavily toward entering the war on the Allied side, the Germans, and this is the final bullet here, announced unrestricted submarine warfare. Because of the near starvation by the British blockade, the German leaders were desperate. Desperate German leaders announced that they would sink all ships in the blockaded areas. And I've either shown you or I will show you a map of these areas. This declaration of unrestricted submarine warfare violated the principle of the freedom of the seas. And so because of the fact that the Germans were losing, because of the fact that they were starving, because of the fact that we in the United States were still supplying the Allies with food and weapons, they came out and said, we're going to sink anything that we see. Anything approaching Europe will be sunk, regardless of the nationality of that ship. And so the concept of freedom of the seas, the right of neutral nations like the United States to ship non-military goods to nations at war, which of course, I think this is an important part right there. The Lusitania was not necessarily a non-warship. Now, it was a civilian passenger liner, but it was carrying tons of military goods. Now, this is a small point, but it's something we need to keep in mind. The Lusitania was carrying weapons to the Brits. It was also carrying passengers. So it is not necessarily it's not necessarily a clear point as to the distinction of Lusitania. Was it a ship of war? No. Was it carrying munitions to the enemy? Well, Germany thought so. And so that's one of the reasons why it was attacked. Okay, so let's get back to this. Freedom of the seas. The unrestricted submarine warfare destroyed what we felt was the right of every nation to travel the seas unhindered. After this announcement of the unrestricted submarine warfare by the Germans, American ships were actually attacked by German submarines. When the German submarines fact, let me clean this up a little bit so we can see this last couple of sentences here. Okay, so when the German submarines attacked American merchant ships, President Wilson had no recourse. He asked Congress for a declaration of war. And that ends the second section. We'll come back in the next video and hit section 3, and then we'll finish up with section 4.